Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Saturday, April the 24th, 2021. What I'd like to talk about today is the draconian voting laws that were just passed in Georgia a few weeks ago, and the relationship of the corporation in America to these draconian voting laws that were just passed. I'm going to end up, and hopefully I have enough time, I'm going to end up on a lighter note, and I'm going to talk about the Van Gogh immersion show that's going on in San Francisco right now, and I think in New York. And I have another good story also, another positive story. But let me get started here in the beginning with the Georgia election. And excuse me, but I haven't been on for 2 weeks, and I had a little bit of a problem here with the water heater in the house, which happens to be in the middle of where this sort of studio space I have created, and that put a crimp on things for a couple of weeks. So that's why I was a little bit off the air and didn't get a show up last week. Also, I wound up cutting myself shaving. What are you going to do? My makeup department didn't have enough materials to fix things, make it look any better, so we're going to have to live with this. Okay, well, 2 weeks ago I did a show about the Georgia voting situation. And I reviewed the show and I looked at it and I realized that I was confused by what I was saying. We had, on one hand, they passed this draconian voting restriction law in Georgia, and they passed it within 24 hours, literally. They wrote the bill, they got it through both houses of the legislature, and signed by the governor within 24 hours. Now, the last time something that fast happened in Georgia was probably when the Allman Brothers were leaving on a tour. But other than that, things don't happen that quickly down in Georgia, usually. So anyway, this happens. And 2 days later, or the next day, the Major League Baseball comes out and cancels the All-Star game that's going to be in Atlanta. Simultaneously, Coca-Cola comes out, Delta Airlines comes out, and even AT&T, which is sort of based everywhere, has come out against these Georgia voter restriction laws. So the week is going on. So first we hear about the voter restriction laws. Then we hear about some corporate opposition to those laws. Then we hear Mitch McConnell. We have Mitch McConnell telling the corporations, this was like absolutely a mind-boggling. He tells the corporations to stay out of politics. Stay out of politics. That's exact quote from Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell has built his whole career supporting the corporations' involvement in politics. And the corporations are not staying out of politics. Believe me, they are politics. The business of America is business, and the corporation is well embedded in the democratic process. No doubt about it. What was going on with these four companies that I mentioned, AT&T, Coca-Cola, Delta, Major League Baseball. I'm not sure about Major League Baseball in terms of the last thing I'm about to say. But Delta, Coke, and AT&T were supporting legislatures in other states like Michigan, like Texas, like Iowa, where they were writing the rules for these draconian laws. So they're supporting the draconian laws over here, but in Georgia, where they just passed, because there was such a public outcry, these four companies jumped right in, expressing their dismay about this ruling. A couple of days later, the Black Economic Alliance gets together, and they got a couple of the black executives, and they get a whole bunch of other people together, and they form a whole group, and they publish a 2-page in the New York Times on, I think this was on the 14th, and this was, "We stand for democracy, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people," which is the way I remember it. And interestingly, let me just pull myself into this for a second. Interestingly, so the thing happens on Friday, and then the next day or so, these 3 or 4 companies come out against it. And then this gets published in the paper a few days after that. Well, the three major companies, let's see if AT&T is here. Here's the corporations under A. Oops, AT&T's not there. Let me look under D for Delta. Oops, Delta's not there either. Let me see, C for Coke. Coca-Cola's not there either. Well, imagine that. Coke, AT&T, and Delta. They didn't sign on to the document here, and neither did the Major League Baseball. Now, it's not that nobody signed on to this, because, well, quite a few people did, actually. Let's just take a let's look at United Airlines, Starbucks, Levi Strauss, MasterCard, McKinsey, Microsoft, Facebook, Airbnb, Alphabet, Amazon, American Airlines. Oh my God. And then we've got hundreds of people here, hundreds of people, many of them CEOs from various companies. In fact, their titles are next to them. So quite a few CEOs from major companies throughout the country signed on to this document. Probably about 50 nonprofit foundations signed up over here, including the NYU School of Business. Legal firms, we have probably a good 30, 40, 50 legal firms here, including Sullivan and Cromwell, big firm in Manhattan. I believe my granddaughter works for them. Individuals, corporations, the original signatories of it, including Ed Lewis. You're not going to know too many. I'm not familiar with too many of these names. But the point was, the corporations who were most vocal about it initially seemed to lose their vocalness when it came time to put their put their nose to the grindstone here and commit to something. So that was part of what was causing quite a bit of the confusion in my mind here. What the hell's going on? They're on one hand, these four companies are supporting the suppression of voting rights, and over here they're in favor of voting rights. And then a couple of hundred companies come out and publish an ad in the newspaper in supporting the Democratic Party and supporting the Democratic voting process. And these four major companies won't sign on to this letter. So this is all going on within the first week or so. And then shortly thereafter that, his name is, I had not run into this guy before. His name is Jerry Sonnenfeld, and he's got an article here which I think I downloaded from Media Matters. The GOP big business divorce goes deeper than you think. The GOP big business divorce goes deeper than you think. And I'm going to read a little bit from here as we go along. It's quite interesting, and it does, in a sense, it does answer the question, what's going on here, although it doesn't totally satisfy it for me. One thing you want to know about corporations in general, corporations by their very nature are top-down. They're not democratic. Now, I used to, when I was a young man, many years ago, when I first started working for AT&T, I had this concept of democracy in my mind. And for some reason, I guess I felt like it extended to the corporate world. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. If any, corporate world is top-down, anti-democratic. If anything, they're pro-fascist. They like to get monies from the government. They like to get tax breaks from the government. They like government. They like socialism for the large corporations. They don't like it for the smaller people. So by their very nature, they're anti-democratic, which is why I was so surprised when so many of these sort of pro-democracy people came out against this bill, including this Jerry Sonnenfeld, which, like I said, we'll talk about in a few minutes here. Now, I mentioned these corporations and AT&T a number of times now, and the reason is, about a month ago, I did 5 shows on the Powell Memo. And the Powell Memo was, Lewis Powell was a corporate lawyer working for the cigarette industry. And he gets hired or commissioned by the Chamber of Commerce to respond to a document that's concerning itself with the attack on the American free enterprise system. As a result of the 60s, and a result of the riots that were going on in the 60s and the social justice, the calls for social justice and the anti-war activity, the Chamber of Commerce felt like democracy and capitalism, really democracy, was being attacked. And therefore, they needed to firm it up. So they go to Lewis Powell. He puts together this 20-odd page memo. And in it, he's basically calling for the establishment of all of these right-wing think tanks, such as the Heritage and the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Papers, and a half a dozen of these, which I mentioned on the last show. So they call for the establishment of these think tanks, and these think tanks are going to then provide intellectual fodder for potential talk show hosts on the radio, on television, for people writing editorials into newspapers, for people that are going to write books. So their push is to get these think tanks going to counteract the universities, which are basically studying the social sciences in general. They want to focus and narrow them down to the corporate world. So they want to get these think tanks to take a corporate point of view, massage that point of view, and then spread it out to other elements in society. So I'm going to go on this board here. I put this together the other day, or this a little bit ago. I just wrote down the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has mostly been aligned with labor through most of my life. The Republican Party has mostly been involved with the corporation through most of my life. So there's been a major symbiotic relationship between the corporation and the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and labor. Well, along comes the Chamber of Commerce in 1971. And the Chamber of Commerce had been more pro-small business prior to the 70s. But by the time 71 comes along, they are cheerleaders for large corporations in America. And the Powell memo gets written, gets published, and it leads to the formation of these various think tanks. So we have the Federalist and, like I said, the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation winds up, in 1992, Bill Clinton gets elected. In 1994, Newt Gingrich publishes his Contract on America. So the shift is already starting to happen. The 80s went through, and Reagan was the president, and we got lower taxes, and we eviscerated the unions with the attack on the flight controllers. So by the time the 90s are coming along, and Bill Clinton shows up at the Democratic National Convention. He's definitely not a shoo-in. But what happens is the corporations, or let's call them now Wall Street basically buys the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. And that's how Bill Clinton winds up becoming president. He gets nominated by the DNC. He walks away with the convention. Bill Clinton is your typical Chicago School of Economics, centrist, probably more Republican than most of the people in the Republican Party today. So Clinton gets in over here in 92. In 94, Newt Gingrich comes up with his Contract on America, which is one of the most anti-democratic proposals ever put forward. With it, he gains back the Senate for the Republican Party in the midterm election. So what's happening is the Republican Party is getting less and less with the corporation, and the corporation is getting more and more with the Democratic Party. So the Republican Party is been pretty much almost been taken over by the fundamentalist, the right-wing fundamentalism, by the right-wing Christian fundamentalists with their white supremacy as their main issue, and then the guns, the gays, and abortion as the three main wedge issues. They got these few wedge issues they pretty much don't have a political platform anymore. And in fact, when Trump was at the convention in 2016, there was no Republican platform. The Republican platform was Donald Trump. So all of this time here, the Democratic Party, more and more influenced by the corporations. So by the time we get to this era in here, the Democrats don't have, labor has lost its power, and labor doesn't have the kind of power that they used to have. They don't have the unions that they used to have. The unions are depleted, and the corporations have been supplying them with money, so that's going along. So there's been a complete reversal of the two parties over this period of time. And you wind up over here with the fundamentalists, the white supremacists, and the guns, the gays, and the abortions as the main issues for the Republican Party over here. Wall Street is not looking so good anymore, and now with Joe Biden coming in and with a little bit of some progressives in back of him, Wall Street seems to be getting pushed aside. Labor seems to be getting brought more to the fore, and Joe Biden is making a serious attempt at restoring some of the economic injustices that have been perpetrated by the system for the last 50 years. 50 years is about what it boils down to when you get down to it. So that was the main kind of thing I wanted to point out, was this sort of switch in the two sides. And I'm going to go back to the this was the paper that was published by Jerry Sonnenfeld. And I looked this guy up and I Googled him. It turns out he's a major business professor and he's an associate dean at the Yale School of Management, which he founded. He founded a management school at Yale for CEOs, chief executive officers. Goes on to say, what the GOP cares about and what major business cares about are increasingly incompatible. The GOP and business, who used to be like this, now they're becoming very incompatible. The GOP doesn't have a platform. They've got these wedge issues that they're pushing. And, well, he goes on to say here, he said, the GOP tries to position itself as the home of working class values. That's been the pitch they've been making, that the progressives are ruining the country and all these libertarian, or these giving people the right to proclaim what their sexuality is, to have abortions, blah, 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 all of these things, immigration rights, voting issues, that the Republican Party has been sort of claiming that they are the stalwarts of working class values. But the issues like voting rights, immigration, transgender restrooms, all of these things have economic impacts. The corporation has customers who are who they're reliant on, and has workers who they're reliant on. And what they're going on to say is that the millions of people alienated by the infighting about immigration rights and the transgenders, they're their future customers, and they believe that they're the employees of the company. And the bad news for the Republicans is that they have a 1920s view of who the big business workforce is. The workforce is highly diverse, and they get along. And trying to stir things up is misguided. Stirring them up is misguided. They're saying that the whole Republican platform is misguided. And he goes on to say here, basically, business leaders believe that it's in the interest of society to have social harmony. Well, it's an 8-page document that I've downloaded. And he must mention social harmony about half a dozen. I've circled it every time he does. He's mentioned it half a dozen times in here, social harmony. It might be good to have a war overseas, but these corporations don't think it's so good to have a war at home. So if we have a war overseas and we drop bombs and we build things and drop them and build them and drop them, build them and drop them, that's one thing. But if we do it at home, it's not going to be too good for us. So they're definitely in favor of social harmony. And one of the other interesting points was this. This last November during the election, major business leaders worked hard to guarantee that millions of workers got time off to vote. They go on to say here, we've never heard of that before. Now, I remember in the early 70s when I worked for AT&T, Tuesday, voting day, you could get 3 hours off work to go vote. They also used to shut down on Ash Wednesday. So there were a lot of things that happened 50 years ago, which nobody even remembers happening. But anyway, the point was they gave people time off to vote. They put a lot of their own time and energy into ensuring that elderly voting people were able to get to their places where they needed to vote. They helped people with the ballots. They were helping people who were at the risk of COVID. So they put a lot of time and energy into making sure the election went well. They were so proud that this was the largest, fairest, and most secure election in U.S. history. And they have condemned by Republicans after the companies put so much into ensuring that they're upset. The election has been condemned by the Republicans. The corporations are upset that the Republicans are telling them that it was a lousy election because they know it wasn't a lousy election. They put time and energy into making sure it was secure, and it was secure, and it worked. So this is pretty major. I think that's pretty major that they're coming out with this kind of a statement. As we go through here, he had an interesting statement here, and he's talking about progressives and social democrats, and he's basically saying that a lot of social democrats are misclassified as progressives. But he's saying the business community is somewhere between Mitt Romney and Joe Biden. The business community is somewhere between Mitt Romney, who's the outlier of the Republican Party, and Joe Biden. I mean, this is just amazing. And then he goes on to talk about what the CEO's job, the Chief Executive Officer's job, is to create and fortify social harmony. I mean, we went through 20-odd pages of the Powell memo. I don't think we saw social harmony mentioned once in there. The paper goes on. He's repeating himself, social harmony again. And he says, the political desire to use wedge issues to divide, which used to be a fringe in the GOP, has become mainstream in the GOP. Whoops. That was some old notes. Let me take those down. The business community, what they're interested in is free markets. They're not as interested in a 5% difference in their tax structure as they are in having a free market for products, a free market for financials, and a free market for labor. Land, labor, capital. The business community wants to see a free market available to them, and they're more interested in the free market and in social cohesion than they are in 5% difference in their profits. They even came out and said it. They were on this rather lengthy Zoom call they had, a Zoom conference call. So-and-so put this together. And he thought there were going to be maybe 5 or 10 people would show up. It was at the last minute. It was on the weekend. He didn't think it was going to get much traction. 200 people showed up from all these various corporations. And there was quite a bit of agreement as to what was going on and the fact that they needed to have a social cohesion. They were against these bathroom bills. They were against these immigration restrictions. They're in favor of democracy and voting. And this was another really interesting. Fifth, from surveys, CEO is the most trusted voice in society right now. CEOs, Chief Executive Officers, Jeff Bezos, is the most trusted voice in society right now. Bill Gates. We could go through the names of these people. You know them. They show up. They talk. You trust them in general. The military doesn't have a political voice. The clergy has been knocked down a peg. The elected officials, they're not well respected. He's going through all the different groups that aren't respected anymore. And the business leaders are coming out in the surveys as the most trusted voice in society right now, whereas back in 1970, they were probably the least trusted voice in society right now. I wouldn't go too far with this, though, because on one hand, we have this kind of action happening from these 200 executives who are seeing that the business community finding a new sense of collective civic duty. Well, I think it goes so far because Chevron was in the news just the other night, and as you all know, there is the military dictatorship in Myanmar has been killing lots of people, and their biggest contract for gas and oil is with Chevron. So Chevron is making a fortune off the oil fields in Myanmar, and with the restrictions that we were going to put on Myanmar, Chevron got a little bit bent out of shape about that. So they definitely didn't come out in favor of voting rights in Myanmar, or civil rights or human rights or anything. They came out in favor of corporate profits in as a result of their fields in Myanmar. Okay, so that was 90% of what I wanted to get to today. We talked about the switch in the Republican Party. We talked about the corporation becoming the new hero. And before I close, there were two little items I was going to mention. The good news, well, here, let me just show you the picture. I'll bend up here, 1 second. We're going to take a shift and go to the cultural. We'll put the picture up there. Look at that. And let me, whoops. We'll get the sunflower. Oops, there's the sunflower. Okay. Well, we went the other day. You may have heard about the Van Gogh. It's called the Immersive Van Gogh exhibit. And what they've done is this is in San Francisco right now, and I believe it's going to be in New York, or it is in New York. They gave away a poster, and they gave you a little sunflower, and that's sweet. A little plastic sunflower, and the show is absolutely amazing. It all takes place on one floor, and they have little circles set up so two people can sit in each. So social distancing. You wear a face mask, and you're in this huge sort of auditorium, maybe I don't know, 100 feet, maybe 100 by 100 square feet, and they've taken all of Van Gogh's paintings, they've digitized them, and they've run them into a streaming sort of video. So the paintings are coming up, and in some cases we'll see some line drawing to start, and then the painting will appear. In other cases, some faces are going to come through it. In other cases, they split the painting and they'll have the foreground and the background sort of separated. But it's continuously moving. The show is continuously moving, and the artwork that Van Gogh created is continuously in front of you. You could practically reach out. You could feel the thickness of the paint that's on the canvas. The definition is absolutely astonishing. Anyway, I would highly recommend it if you have a chance, and it's coming to a neighborhood near you. Check out the Van Gogh immersive exhibit in your neighborhood. The other. Let me bring this one in, close it up. Over here. Okay, let me close it down to me. There was a really interesting story, and I thought I brought it down here with me, but I guess I don't seem to have it. Remember Lord of the Flies, the story, Golding's book back in the 60s about the boys that are they're on a boat, and the boat crashes and they wind up on this island. And over the course of time, before they get rescued, they turn into savages. And it turns out that the exact opposite of that happened. There's this seaman from, I think he was from Australia, and he's in the South Seas, and they notice this activity on this what looked like a desolate island. Well, they get there. It turns out that a dozen or so kids between 14 and 60 stole a boat in the South Pacific on a small island. They stole a boat, and they were going to take it on a joyride. So they get out into the waters, and the waters come, and suddenly a storm comes along, the rudder gets broken, the sails get broken, the ship gets blown out to sea. Before you know it, they're drifting for half a dozen days, and they wind up bumping into this small island where they spent the next year and a half. 14 to 16, a year and a half. And the biggest thing they came away with it was cooperation was the key to their survival. Cooperation was the key to their survival. If somebody had a fight, they would send the person with the fight to the other side of the island and make them walk back. And by the time they walked back, they would cool off. So those are my two good stories. The Van Gogh immersive show, and the fact that if you leave a bunch of teenage boys on their own, they're not going to turn into savages. They might actually be civilized. Peace, patience, persistence. We'll see you as soon as we can. Thanks for joining.